process, and we're glad to have her with us. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Every day we hear about innovations in system communications, logistics that make businesses more productive. Some of this modernization is technological, and some of it is just common sense. Today we explore these system innovations in the context of environmental regulation, modernizing environmental programs, and making them more efficient. The states and EPA are partners in the business of working toward cleaner air, water, and soil because the states implement a significant percentage of the environmental laws, and EPA relies on the states for the implementation of its programs, as Ranking Member Waxman reminds me every time we have a hearing. So I'm learning. I've been listening, Mr. Waxman. In this age of declining budgets and workforce, states, EPA, the regulated community, and the public must work together to find ways to improve environmental protection while spending less resources. A great example of Congress working with the EPA and the regulated community to modernize and streamline the way an existing statute is carried out began with the enactment of Public Law 112-195, the Hazardous Waste Electronic Manifest Establishment Act. Negotiations on this bill involve members from both parties, from several committees, and from House leadership, and from the Senate. Once the deal was reached, it passed the House and the Senate without a single dissenting vote. The President signed it into law on October 5th, 2012. This act authorizes EPA to employ a system that uses electronic manifest to track shipments of hazardous waste under the Resources Conservation and Recovery Act, known as RCRA, Subtitle C, from its generation to its ultimate disposal. This streamlines the current process, which requires paper forms and replaces the millions of paper manifests produced each year. Today we'll hear from the commissioners of 3 states who will share their stories about how the states analyze their programs to determine how they can boost efficiency while maintaining and improving environmental protection. Arizona applies a management principle used in the private sector called lean, which is centered on preserving or creating value using fewer resources. The process improvements made in Arizona as a result of the lean analysis has resulted in a decrease in the average permitting timeline by more than 60% and reduced the average time for a facility to return to the compliance by more than 50%. That means greater and faster protection of the environment and shortening the wait time for the regulated entity to use the permit to carry out their business strategy. Government and permit holders both win. Arkansas will give us examples of its modernization efforts, including how state site inspections are now using electronic tablets to record inspection data and allow the regulated community to sign the forms at the time and the place of the inspection. The permit holder obtains the inspection form on the spot, which means they will know immediately what they need to fix and will allow them to return to compliance much more quickly. Again, most everybody is a winner. Massachusetts will tell how it plans to use geographic information systems and mapping software to provide easy access to site cleanup documents to enable realtors and investors to more easily identify sites that are available for redevelopment. This facilitates real estate redevelopment, economic growth, and the environmental cleanup are both improved. And finally, Bill Kovacs will give us the perspective of the regulated community. We expect Bill to discuss how these initiatives will affect the bottom line of business across America and what further modernization steps could be taken. We welcome all our witnesses and look forward to their testimony. I yield back the balance of my time and recognize the Ranking Member Subcommittee, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of our panelists. Today's hearing gives us an opportunity to examine innovative new tools to enable state and federal environmental regulators to accomplish their mission of environmental and public health protection more efficiently and more effectively. Smart metering, advanced data management, and mapping tools, and advanced monitoring devices can provide state and local governments with the means to deliver significant benefits to the public. We are all aware that budgets are tight and that there are many demands placed upon state and local governments. We have been asking states to do more with less for far too long. New tools can be helpful, but they come at a price. Without funding to procure these new tools and to train people to use them, we are simply imposing another mandate. We should incentivize and support agencies' use of innovative technologies to to achieve greater environmental and public health protection. I believe that the initial investment will pay for itself in a rather short period of time. For example, water leaking from mains represents a significant loss of revenue and the loss of a resource that is growing scarce in some areas of our country. New monitoring technologies can identify leaks in water mains, enabling municipalities to target maintenance and repairs of infrastructure to areas of greatest need. Advanced monitoring devices can identify spills or pollution problems when they first occur, enabling authorities to act quickly to mitigate the problem and avoid costly cleanups and risks to our public health. A clean environment is not a luxury. It is a necessity. We have years of experience to demonstrate that communities do not have to sacrifice public health and the environment for economic growth. And a clean environment is not achieved automatically as a byproduct of a growing GDP and expanding job base. Unfortunately, common essential resources, land, air, and water, are often used as free disposal areas by industry when there are no standards to define and require pollution controls. We learned that lesson many years ago. China is learning it today. The impressive economic growth and job creation in China and the absence of enforceable environmental protection standards has led to serious air, water, and land pollution in many of their industrialized areas. It is leading to health problems, resource shortages, and in some areas it has led to companies offering hardship pay to attract skilled people. Modernizing environmental regulation implies that we will move forward, not backward on environmental protection. The public relies on state and federal environmental regulators to protect their interests. EPA and their partner agencies in the states are making decisions that will have impacts far into our future. Over the years, we have seen industries come and go. That is the nature of a dynamic economy. But we have never lost our need for productive land, clean air, and clean water. Tools to modernize environmental regulation should be evaluated to determine whether they indeed help agencies to achieve greater public health and environmental protection. Better record keeping and web-based reporting of inaccurate or incomplete information achieves nothing. Fast permitting may benefit the permit applicant, but without robust evaluation of a proposed project, there is no guarantee that a new business will be the type of good neighbor that truly benefits an entire community. I look forward to hearing about the initiatives that are underway in the states from our distinguished panel of witnesses. I thank you all for being here this morning to share your experiences and ideas with the subcommittee. My bottom line, if it improves our environmental stewardship, so be it. Let's go forward. If haste makes waste, if it gives us a worse outcome and avoids the mission statement to which we're all assigned, no go. Thank you very much.
Thank my colleague. Turn to the Republican side, see if anybody wishes time for an opening statement. Seeing none, Chair now recognizes ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Technology has an enormous potential to improve environmental protection. From the catalytic converter to smokestack scrubbers, technological advances have brought us cleaner cars and cleaner energy. Now mobile technology can empower citizens to monitor their environment and can help them access real-time information about chemical releases in their neighborhoods. It's important for regulators to embrace new technology, and EPA and the states have taken significant steps toward modernization. In 2011, the Government Accountability Office found serious problems with the state drinking water information systems. The EPA is now undertaking a significant effort to improve and modernize that system, which will ensure that regulators and citizens have access to accurate drinking water quality information. Progress is also being made on hazardous substances. Consumers and researchers looking for information about the dangers of potentially toxic chemicals can now turn to the EPA's ChemView sub-portal. That new website brings together information from multiple programs and sources in a sortable and searchable format. As more testing is done under EPA's chemical action plans, this resource will become more and more valuable. The environmental community is also using new technology to improve environmental protection. Just last week, an environmental group published the results of a partnership with Google that puts sensors on Google Street View mapping cars to detect methane leaks from utility pipes under city streets. The maps they produced illustrate priorities for repair and replacement of aging lines, helping states and municipalities prioritize funding and reduce carbon pollution. We will hear from the panel today about similar projects bringing attention to the health impacts from coal mining and empowering people to participate in the protection of their local environment. I welcome this opportunity to hear about some of these new tools and the strong partnership that has been created between EPA and the states to pursue e-enterprise, a joint effort to maximize the use of advanced information technologies, optimize operations, and increase transparency. I'm supportive of efforts to improve the experience of regulated entities, but these initiatives should remain focused on enhancing environmental protection. The primary customers of environmental regulations, the people served by them, are the public, not the regulated entities. In North Carolina last year, the new Republican head of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources shifted the agency's focus from protecting the public to providing customer service to regulated entities. When staff resigned in protest, he penned an op-ed to proclaim his success in turning the department into, quote, a customer-friendly juggernaut, end quote. We saw the results of that customer service approach in the Dan River coal ash spill. The effects of that spill were visible across 70 miles of the Dan River, crossing from North Carolina into Virginia and affecting drinking water sources for the citizens of Danville and Virginia Beach. According to a recent estimate, the economic impacts of the spill could exceed $70 million. So as we discuss this new technology and the potential for improving the process of environmental regulation, we must ensure that the role of regulators as protectors of the environment is not undermined. State and federal regulators should remain focused on protecting human health and keeping the air and water clean. I look forward to today's testimony and learning how new technologies can be adopted to achieve these goals. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. I want to thank him for his comments. And now I'd like to recognize our panel. I'll do that one at a time. Your full statement has been submitted for the record. You have 5 minutes to summarize. We will not be draconian if you get off for a few seconds. But if you go 5 minutes extra, then you might hear the gavel come down. So that way we can get the questions. It's a large first panel. We want to make sure everyone has access to your testimony and questioning. So with that, first we have Mr. Henry Darwin, who is the Director of Environmental Quality for the state of Arizona. Sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Simkus, Ranking Member Tonko, and distinguished members of the committee. I am Henry Darwin, Director of the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. I've been the Director of ADEQ since February 2011, and prior to my appointment as Director, I served approximately 15 years in various staff level and management positions throughout the agency, including Chief Counsel and Acting Director of the Water Quality Division. I'm the only Director in the agency's 27-year history to have worked in all three of ADEQ's environmental programs, air, water, and waste. As a trained hydrologist and environmental lawyer, as an enforcement officer who has worked to ensure regulated facilities comply with environmental laws, as a former rank-and-file staff member who has sat long hours inside a cubicle, I believe I bring a unique perspective to my role as a head of a state agency responsible for protecting and enhancing public health and the environment of Arizona. During my tenure as a state employee, I have heard many times the demand for increased privatization of government services, as if all that ails government could be fixed by simply turning over the keys to the private sector. Roughly 40% of ADEQ's annual budget is already allocated to private outside services. So we readily support privatization as being possible for an organization entrusted with the important responsibility of ensuring preservation of the delicate balance between the natural world and the society that depends on it for its sustenance, prosperity, and a rewarding quality of life. This does not mean, though, that we support entrusting the private sector with guarding the delicate balance between environmental protection and economic prosperity. To critics who complain about how poorly government agencies perform, I say amen. Such critics are by and large correct. Most systems of government are indeed a mess, but rather than having government run by corporations, perhaps we might be better off encouraging agencies to operate more like corporations. The successful corporations, of course, because why would we emulate flops just because they operate in the private sector? Looking at successful business today, we see that they have several things in common. First and foremost, they do a very good job listening to their customers. Second, they rapidly adapt their processes to fulfill customer expectations. They are also adept at using technology to deliver faster, better, cheaper service and integrate technology the right way at the right time. We only have to look to the demise of Blockbuster Video, who used to have stores on virtually every street corner, to see the consequence of not keeping up with the American public's increasing expectation that quality products and services be delivered immediately and online. At ADEQ, we've made tremendous strides in the past 2 years to improve productivity and efficiency for the benefit of our customers and shareholders by looking to the private sector for lessons about how to improve our processes and use technology to speed customer transactions. In the written comments I leave with you today, I elaborate on what we are doing, especially to deploy lean management as a core philosophy and use it to instill a culture of continuous improvement throughout our organization. I also touch on a key project we have undertaken, which we call MyDEQ, to leverage e-technology to radically simplify and further speed up operational transactions with our customers. The point I want to leave with you is this. To be effective in meeting customer expectations, government agencies have much to learn from successful private sector businesses. What business knows and what government agencies are starting to learn is that to be successful, organizations must both streamline processes to improve capacity for value-added activity and integrate information technology solutions to accelerate delivery of products and services. But these steps must occur in the proper order. First, lean your systems, then integrate e-solutions. Reverse this order, and agencies may well lock in existing burdensome bureaucracy. Before closing my remarks, I'd like to mention my participation in an effort by EPA to bring federal environmental protection into the 21st century. Their effort, known as E-Enterprise, represents an unprecedented level of partnership with the states. As a member of the Leadership Committee, I can tell you that EPA is not merely listening to states like Arizona, they're involving us deeply in developing a model for modern environmental protection, a model very close to what I have just described. Now, I'm not usually one to say that EPA is heading in the right direction, but I can honestly say that I'm happy to join them on this important journey and hope that we can count on your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the chair recognizes Commissioner David Cash from Massachusetts, state of Massachusetts, and he is in charge of the Department of Environmental Protection. Sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank
I was
you
going to say Commonwealth, but I couldn't get it out. So.
Thank you very much, Chairman Shimkus and Ranking Member Tonko and other distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about how the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection has been able to reach its two complementary goals of protecting public health and the environment and helping drive economic development. The agency, catalyzed by both significant reductions in resources and an evolving new economic development mission, devised a path forward that not only ensured the agency fulfilled its critical missions of protecting the environment, ensuring public health, and preserving the Commonwealth's natural resources, but also supported the needs of the Commonwealth's regulated community to facilitate growth and economic development. Between 2002 and 2011, Mass DEP's budget and staffing were reduced by more than 30%, with no corresponding reduction in the agency's statutory environmental mission. In response, Mass DEP undertook initiatives to restore alignment between available agency resources and work requirements. Those initiatives included identification and implementation of alternative regulatory approaches to streamline Mass DEP's processes and procedures, and pursuing major information management initiatives to increase automation and effectiveness of agency activities. Mass DEP's regulatory reform initiative provided a mechanism for reviewing existing regulations to identify efficiency improvements which were required of all state agencies under Governor Deval Patrick's Economic Development Reorganization Act of 2010. MassDEP solicited regulatory reform ideas from a wide array of external stakeholders, as well as from agency staff, and consultation with other agencies, including our Economic Development Agency. This solicitation effort included establishing an external regulatory reform working group to serve as key advisors, in addition to hosting discussion forums with a number of other external stakeholders, with representatives as diverse as the Massachusetts Health Officers Association, Boston Bar Association, Associated Industries of Massachusetts, and a group of prominent environmental advocacy groups. Successful alternative approaches being used by other states across the nation were also evaluated. As a result of its regulatory reform initiative, MassDEP recommended changes that, 1, streamlined environmental permitting requirements, eliminated certain state permits that either were of low environmental protection value or duplicated local approvals, and encouraged better environmental outcomes by reducing barriers to environmentally and economically beneficial projects such as renewable energy. The resulting programmatic changes will achieve substantial agency efficiencies without sacrificing environmental protection by allowing MassDEP to disinvest from low-value regulatory activities, rely upon local regulatory entities where redundant oversight currently exists, and utilize authorized and accredited third parties for selective environmental inspection and regulatory implementation services. These regulatory changes include improvements to the following MassDEP programs: cleanup of oil and hazardous materials, waste sites, public waterfront protection, wetlands protection, septic system, solid waste transfer stations and landfills, and the siting of clean energy projects. Promulgation of these regulations is complete with the exception of wetlands and waterfront protection regulations, which are due to be finished by the end of this year. One significant example of how MassDEP's streamlining of the regulatory permitting process resulted in reducing barriers to environmentally beneficial projects is the use of closed and capped landfills to support renewable energy facilities such as solar panels or wind turbines. Previously, MassDEP regulations prohibited the utilization of closed and capped landfills for any other purpose. By understanding the opportunity that renewable energy facilities could provide for closed landfills, MassDEP revised its regulations to allow renewable energy projects while maintaining environmental protection. Just in the last couple of years, 52 projects at about 100 megawatts of renewable energy have been proposed, and 23 of those are already running. In addition to effectively revising its regulations, MassDEP is undertaking an agency-wide review of its business processes to achieve greater efficiency and consistency across the agency. The effort was initiated in coordination with MassDEP's proposed information system development effort known as IPASS, Energy and Environmental Information and Public Access System, and is intended to enable both MassDEP to perform timely, predictable, and cost-effective permitting and implement data-driven strategies and policies while responding effectively to environmental threats. In particular, IPASS is designed to reduce uncertainty for the time to businesses, improve stewardship of Massachusetts environmental resources, use data-driven strategies and policies, increase civic engagement, and enhance collaboration and data sharing. Massachusetts has brownfields programs, also has incentives that are available to buyers and sometimes sellers of contaminated property, and provided is a commitment to environmental cleanup and property redevelopment. We've committed to this cleanup in such a way that we are coordinating data gathering for a variety of different criteria that the developing community is interested in accessing, and coordinating this with our Mass GIS system. So through a mapping and data program, we're able to provide information to municipalities and the development community on these sites that show great promise for both renewable energy development and development of more traditional economic development. Finally, by partnering with EPA on the E-Enterprise for the Environment Initiative, MassDEP and EPA can achieve additional governmental efficiencies while reducing administrative burden reduction. E-Enterprise for the Environment is an innovative 21st century business strategy utilizing joint governance of states and EPA to improve the performance of our shared environmental enterprise by closely coordinating program implementation and creating efficiencies for the regulated community and the public. Through continued support of the E-Enterprise, I believe that EPA, the states, and regulated entities will all benefit from a more coordinated environmental enterprise. I also believe that the E-Enterprise initiative will maximize governmental efficiencies and significantly reduce administrative burdens through streamlining regulations, optimizing processes, and coordinating system development activities. Thank you for providing me this opportunity to provide testimony today, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize Director Teresa Marks, Director of Environmental Quality from the state of Arkansas.
Chairman Shimkus, Ranking Member Tonko, and all members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to speak today about my department's ongoing efforts to modernize environmental regulation through electronic reporting. By way of disclaimer, let me just say initially that I am probably the least tech-savvy person in this room. I'm one of those people that when I fire up my computer in the morning, I'm still amazed by the miracle of email. But I am a very practical person, and I realize the tremendous benefits that can be achieved through the use of electronic reporting. The Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality strives to be responsive to members of the public, whether they're seeking water quality data, filling out a Title V air permit application, or reporting an environmental concern. We all realize that electronic reporting doesn't completely replace traditional ways of doing business. A citizen in Rosebud wanting a speaker for the local Lions Club will probably still pick up the phone, and the owner of a small salvage yard in Romance will most likely mail in their stormwater permit application. But electronic reporting puts a wealth of information and opportunity at a user's fingertips and greatly benefits the department. Users save time and money, not to mention the sparing of a few trees. From the department standpoint, electronic reporting allows us to more quickly respond to complaints, review permits, and upload data. In this day and age, the large majority of the businesses and residents we serve are tech savvy, so it behooves the department to keep up. I'd like to talk briefly about what ADQ has done to modernize reporting and how we plan to improve and expand electronic offerings in the future. Since 2012, ADQ has used the State and Local Emissions Inventory System, or SLICE as it's referred to allow permitted facilities to submit point source emissions inventory data online. SLICE is compliant with the Environmental Protection Agency's cross-media electronic reporting regulation, commonly called CROMER. ADQ used an EPA grant to develop the system in partnership with environmental agencies in Arizona, Delaware, New Hampshire, West Virginia, and Tennessee. The system has proven popular in our state with 90 to 95% of reporting facilities entering their data directly into the system. Hazardous waste generators and treatment, storage, and disposal facilities in Arkansas can use a CROMER-approved system to submit annual reports that detail how much hazardous waste a given facility generates or manages. Clean Water Act permit holders can submit discharge monitoring reports electronically using a net DMR system developed by EPA and used nationally. Again, these reporting tools streamline the reporting process, not only for the public, but for ADQ employees as well, resulting in the saving of both public and private resources. An example of how modernized reporting has made the department more efficient is the use of electronic tablets in our regulated storage tanks division. Each inspector at ADQ in the storage tank division carries such a tablet when performing facility inspections. The inspection forms are loaded onto the tablets, and the inspector is able to fill out the form on site while in the presence of the facility operator. Once the inspection is complete, the facility operator signs the inspection report, and with the use of secure software, the form is locked to ensure the signature can't be copied or the form changed without the facility operator's knowledge. The inspection report can be printed on site with the mobile printers they carry in their truck and given to the facility owner, who can start addressing potential issues immediately instead of waiting for a copy of the report to arrive through traditional mail services. We're excited about the strides we've made to modernize reporting in recent years, but in many ways the best is yet to come. I often say that the citizens of Arkansas are our eyes and ears. Our inspectors ensure that facilities across Arkansas comply with their permits, but they can't be everywhere all the time. Currently, citizens can submit complaints online 24 hours a day or call our offices directly when they see something they view as an environmental hazard. Our staff is developing a mobile application that would allow users to submit complaints along with GPS coordinates and photos from their phones. Those details will aid our inspectors in determining the severity of any violation as well as the exact location of the area of concern. This information will be invaluable in addressing violations in a timely and efficient manner. Finally, we're in the late stages of developing an e-portal system that will allow applicants to apply for permits, licenses, and registrations online. The e-portal system, which we hope to roll out in the fall, was developed using CROMER standards and is currently being reviewed by EPA. The first feature to go live will be the online permit application submission process. The development of this system has involved an incredible amount of staff time and resources, a good bit of trial and error, and a lot of testing, but we are confident the end result will be well worth the effort. Electronic reporting has allowed the department to be more efficient and more responsive. We hope to continue to improve and expand our offerings to meet the demands of the public in the most efficient and effective way possible. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Bill Kovacs, representing the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, sir. 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Simkus, Ranking Member Tonko and other members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss modernizing the business of environmental regulation and protection. The committee should really be commended for this very important issue of dealing with the federal-state relationship, especially in the implementation of environmental laws. The relationship between the states and EPA is very important because the states manage most of the implementation, permitting, enforcement, inspections, data collections for federal environmental programs. According to ECOS, the Environmental Council of the states manage approximately 96% of the federal programs that are delegated to the states. And I think it's fair to say that without the states' cooperation and willingness to assume these responsibilities, EPA would have a difficult time implementing federal statutes. The Chamber is also pleased to learn that ECOS and EPA are partnering in the e-Enterprise initiative. My understanding is that e-Enterprise initiative aims to modernize environmental programs in order to reduce paperwork, enhance services to the regulated community, and streamline operations. E-Enterprise is presently in a concept phase, so it's kind of hard for us to offer a blanket support for the program, but we do offer a general support because we think it's an excellent idea, and any way in which the business community can help, we would be glad to assist. It's important to note, however, that over the last, since the Carter administration, many of these efforts have been tried, and really we've had somewhat of a mixed success. What seems to happen is the streamlining efforts literally get overwhelmed by a regulatory system that continuously becomes much more complex and much more costly. As a result, the states assume responsibility for managing more programs, implementing and enforcing more and newer regulations in shorter time frames, and they have to do all of this with less money. In fact, the amount of money awarded to the states by the federal government has been reduced from $5 billion in fiscal year 2010 to $3.6 billion in fiscal year 13. So the complexity and the costs of the mandates imposed on the states are significant, and they're really going to get worse as we cut the budgets. I think just this year, if you look at it, you're going to see 3 very complex and staff-intensive rulemakings that the states are going to have to pick up over the years. Greenhouse gas regulations for existing power plants, ozone, for which the states are going to do implementation plans, and waters of the U.S. These are 3 huge programs that they're going to have to deal with. So we need to be conscious of how much we can impose upon the states and how much we can ask them to do with the resources that we're willing to give them. So I have several suggestions. One is anything we can do to help on e-Enterprise, let us know. We will help. The Chamber has been very active in pursuing what we call permit streamlining. We believe it's one of the few efforts in the federal government that has really garnered an enormous amount of bipartisan support. The House passed a bill on permit streamlining, H.R. 2641, with bipartisan support. The Senate Federal Permitting and Improvement Act, sponsored by Senator Portman, has 6 Democrat co-sponsors. Permit streamlining was one of the top recommendations of the President's Jobs Council. It's been the subject of several presidential directives, and it's been the focus of the new infrastructure initiative released by the White House. I'm not saying there's all agreement, but we're much closer on this issue than we are on most. Second, I think we can look at some practical things. EPA promulgates, for example, national ambient air standards every 5 years. They must be revised by law. They must at least review them. And every 5 years, EPA does revise them. This is very rushed because when you're a state, the states have to go back and they have to, once they get the federal mandate, they have to design it, they have to implement it, and many times they have to litigate it. And we're saying that rather than doing something every 5 years, there should be more discretion, because what happens is if you do everything in a 5-year period, the states really never catch up. They just finish and they're on to a new system, and it's so rushed that we really never get a time even to find out what's working and what's not. I think federal agencies should truly look at the Unfunded Mandates Act, and so should Congress as you look at regulatory alternatives. And finally, I really think that the states do a fabulous job. In the course of a year, they end up doing hundreds of thousands of types of transactions and enforcements and inspections. but sometimes the EPA decides that it wants to overfile it because it doesn't like one particular way in which they're handling an issue. So anyway, with that, I'll quit, and thank you very much. I'll answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes Scott Schlesinger, Legislative Director for the National Resources Defense Council. He's appeared before us many times. Welcome back, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Tonko, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Scott Schlesinger, and I am the Legislative Director of the Natural Resources Defense Council. NRDC is a nonprofit organization of scientists, lawyers, and environmental specialists dedicated to protecting public health and the environment. Before becoming the Legislative Director, I spent a decade promoting the e-manifest concept as a lobbyist for the hazardous waste disposal industry. My remarks reflect that experience, as well as my years as a regulator at EPA and my current perspective at NRDC. The striking lesson trying to move towards electronic manifest was how new technologies gradually put to rest concerns over security and cost. There was plenty of resistance at the outset. The Justice Department had serious concerns about anything but a handwritten signature based on hundreds of years of American and common law jurisprudence. This concern about newfangled technology in some ways echoed a Mortgage Bankers magazine article from 1947 that talked about the signature problem spawned by a new technology invention that was said was made for counterfeiters, the ballpoint pen. When I left the industry in 2009, the major technology problem was how to allow waste haulers to confirm delivery by use of a landline. The idea that virtually everyone would have a smartphone was just not contemplated. Another problem was how and who should pay for the reduction of the paperwork burden on companies. This was finally compromised in the bill authorizing electronic manifest passed this committee. It was signed into law. A key lesson learned through this process is that technology keeps changing. The goal of finding a platform and using it over and over again, which is contemplated in the e-enterprise principles, must be done with care and eyes wide open. Tomorrow's technology may make today's cloud tomorrow's VCR. The other hurdle to get e-manifest authorized was how hard it was to pass even what we thought was minor changes in basic environmental laws. Manifest changes at least 10 years. Many more of the advances in electronic reporting will require regulatory changes. However, the regulatory process, because of executive orders and required impact statements, is so convoluted, it often takes the agency more than 6 years to do a simple regulatory change, enough time to make a rule dealing with new technologies obsolete before the rule is final. Proposals to expand these processes for guidance documents and adding on top of that something like the RAINS Act places epic hostile artificial barriers in the path of EPA and state modernization. Using new technologies is necessary as industry becomes wired and budget cuts make working the traditional way unsustainable. But these benefits come at a financial startup cost to develop, while this Congress continues to eviscerate the EPA budget. The e-enterprise vision implies that improving environmental outcomes and dramatically enhancing services to the regulated community and public are equal principles. We believe the number one goal of e-enterprise should and must be striving for better environmental outcomes. Reducing paperwork is what the manifest is a nice outcome, but EPA should not be investing its few dollars, now at an all-time low, for anything that does not advance EPA's mission of improving the environment and public health. The movement towards e-enterprise and enforcement is positive because it could lead to more and cheaper inspections and enforcement. However, EPA's strategic plan promises significantly less compliance and enforcement efforts going forward, even using new technologies. Cuts in environmental enforcement inevitably lead to less protection and unfair competitive disadvantage to responsible companies who play by the rules. EPA's plan to use technology and aim its enforcement at the greatest threats in the largest companies belies the problem that how can they tell where these threats are with their acknowledged reduced capacity. Aiming at just the large companies doesn't help either. Actual experience shows that many times, such as a recent spill in West Virginia or the Keystone spill that close the James River that very small companies can cause substantial harm. Recent amendments and proposals outlined in my footnotes in my testimony show that essentially taking low-profit margin recyclers of toxic hazardous materials off the grid, companies under tremendous pressure to cut corners, worry the environmental community and these companies, local communities, at least in those communities that even know what these companies are doing. High-tech monitoring only works with companies that have the technology and the states even know exist. Because of other priorities, the environmental community, and particularly the environmental justice communities, without substantial outreach by the states and EPA, could be detached to the e-enterprise effort. We believe the final products of e-enterprise will be significantly improved if meaningful efforts are made to include these key customers in the development of these programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least is Matt Wasson, Director of Programs for the group Appalachian Voices. So you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Shimkus, Ranking Member Tonko, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Matt Wasson. I'm the Director of Programs at Appalachian Voices. We're an organization dedicated to protecting the land, air, water, and people of the southern and central Appalachian region. Appalachian Voices supports the committee's goal of modernizing environmental regulation and protection, certainly using technology and science to achieve better environmental outcomes at lower cost is a goal that we, and I think all Americans, share. But modernization doesn't only mean finding technological solutions. Modernization means adapting to modern realities. And so in the context of today's hearing, it's useful to ask what has changed over the 40 or 50 years since Congress passed the nation's key environmental laws and our modern state federal regulatory apparatus was put in place. Certainly the ability of private interests to influence the political process has skyrocketed in recent years. And that influence is even greater at the state level than it is at the federal level. That means that the ability of regulated industries to influence the regulatory process at the state level is greater than it has ever been. Any genuine attempt to confront that threat requires a greater, not lesser, role for federal agencies like the EPA. Another thing that has changed since the 1970s is the assumption underlying our key environmental laws that industry can be trusted to self-report environmental violations to regulatories. That now appears naive, at least as it applies to the coal industry in Appalachia. As I went into in depth in my written testimony, the biggest coal companies in Kentucky for years routinely failed to deliver discharge monitoring reports to state regulators, in addition to filing false reports that regulators failed to detect until environmental groups like Appalachian Voices stepped in. Worst of all, companies appear to have manipulated water quality results in a manner that is virtually impossible to explain with an innocent explanation. For instance, the statistical likelihood that the conductivity values submitted by one of the biggest coal companies in Kentucky could have occurred through natural variation approaches 1 in a Google. That's 1 with 100 zeros after it. Modernizing environmental regulation and protection in this context means confronting this reality and investing more resources and manpower in state and federal regulatory agencies' ability to review and independently verify the discharge monitoring reports provided by coal companies. Decreasing the funding and power of these agencies' funding moves in the direct opposite direction of modernization. Most importantly of all, there was little scientific information linking mountaintop removal to elevated cancer and other diseases among nearby residents back in the 1970s or even 10 years ago. But as I discussed quite a bit in my written testimony, a trove of peer-reviewed scientific studies and multiple independent sources of information have emerged over the last 5 years that regulators should not continue to ignore. Here are the modern facts for people living near mountaintop removal mines in Appalachia. And if we can have that first slide. People living near mountaintop removal mines in Appalachia, which are shown in red on the slide, are 50% more likely to die from cancer than other people in Appalachia. In addition, their children are 42% more likely to be born with birth defects. Next slide, please. Did you skip one? Oh. My apologies. We can continue on. People living near mountaintop removal, or in counties with mountaintop removal mining in Appalachia, have a life expectancy that is far behind the national average and is comparable to people living in developing countries like Iran, Syria, El Salvador, and Vietnam. And these negative trends are not just about health. They also include socioeconomic trends. For instance, the counties where mountaintop removal mining occurs are seeing some of the most rapid population loss of anywhere in the country, as the next slide shows. Modernizing environmental regulation and protection in Appalachia means confronting these facts directly. And it happens that this subcommittee has a unique ability to do just that. A bill called the Appalachian Community Health Emergency Act, or AIC Act for short, was reported to the subcommittee. I'm not in a position to speak substantively about the bill, but fortunately Congressman Yarmouth, the lead sponsor, was able to join us today. Thank you, Congressman. What I can say is this. The voices of the Appalachian residents supporting the AIC Act deserve to be heard, and this committee should hold hearings on that bill and the community health emergency in Appalachia that the bill addresses. One final thing that has changed dramatically in Appalachia since the 1970s is the simple geological reality that the highest quality and easiest to access coal seams have been mined out. In addition, the modern reality of energy markets is that Appalachian coal simply can no longer compete with inexpensive new sources of natural gas. What this means is that the market for Central Appalachian coal is going away and it's not coming back. Appalachians are proud of the contribution their region has made in supplying affordable energy to power America's rise to the greatest economy on earth. But the word modernization in Appalachia means looking beyond the coal industry for a sustainable source of jobs and economic growth in the region. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And now we'll begin our opening statements. And Mr. Wasson, I would say you're correct in the market debate of what's going on in West Virginia and the coal, but I would tell you, thanks for the challenging of the lower coal seams. Coal mining in southern Illinois is increasing, and that helps our economy in southern Illinois. So we understand the economic realities. We welcome these jobs in southern Illinois. Director Darwin, I was curious, you mentioned the word customers. Who are your customers?
Mr. Chairman, our customers really depend on the product or service that we're delivering. And we define customers as the end user of the product or service. So an end user could be the permittee that's applied for a permit and ultimately going to have to comply with the permit, understand the permit, implement the terms of the permit. If we're developing a web service of some sort that's available to the public, the public being the end user of that web service would be the customer in that context. So customer doesn't always mean the regulated community. It could also mean the general public, so long as the service that we're providing or the product that we're delivering has them as the end user.
Could it also mean public interest groups like the NRDC or the Sierra Club or Appalachian Voices if Appalachia was part of your state, which it's not. I know that. But.
Certainly, that would be the case. Like I said, it's so long as whatever we're delivering as a product or service has them being one of the end users, and because they're a member of the public and we serve the public, a lot of the things that we do have the end user, the general public, in mind.
Mr. Cash, I also was very interested in your opening statement. And also the phrase low environmental protection value. How did you make a determination? I mean, sometimes we have our debates here, and we never get to that point because anything mentioned environmentally is high. We can't even classify that in our debate on chemicals sometimes. Obviously, you did that. Can you talk me through how you did that? And did you have public involvement? Did you have the private sector? Did you have the, obviously the non-governmental organizations? Did you have the public as a whole? How did you do that, make that determination?
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's a great question. And when we were faced with the declining budgets, it became very clear that there were multiple interested parties that were concerned about steps forward. Certainly you had the environmental community that was concerned that environmental protection would become more relaxed, and that was of grave concern to our agency as well. And then you had the regulated community that was concerned that permitting times would take longer, it would become a more complex kind of endeavor moving forward. And so I think the real answer to your question is that we had a very robust stakeholder process and a advisory group that was formed that wasn't just an ad hoc one-time meeting. These were people from the regulated community, environmental communities, municipalities, other state agencies who were engaged in this long-term discussion about how do we do more in a more budget-constrained environment. How do we continue to protect the environment? How do we continue to allow the regulated community to have the certainty and timeliness that it needs? And so we had very difficult conversations about where there might be places that we could reduce the efforts that we did. Now, some of these were relatively easy, where we found places where there were multiple redundant permits, state and local permits that regulated the same kind of wetlands, but forms had to be filled out for all three, et cetera. That was relatively easy. But in an example of what you're talking about, or of those kinds of environmental values that we felt like in a real budget-constrained environment, what could we focus on less? One, for example, was docks and piers, small docks and piers, which underwent basically the same kind of resources for large coastal or wetlands projects. And here, in agreement in this advisory committee, we said, you know what, we could put a little less resources into the evaluation of these kinds of permits. So the real answer is that it was through the conversations that we had that collectively, and there was not consensus everywhere, of course, but everybody had a stake at the table. And as we changed our regulations, each of those regulations then went through the official public process with public hearings.
Thank you. And if I can, I'll want to follow up with you on that. And maybe there's a process by which we can adapt here to help us move forward.
Absolutely.
And Ms. Marks, on also, since I'm from a large rural area, I represent 33 counties. There's 102 counties in the state of Illinois. Your debate on your tablet issue, I want you to highlight it again based upon, from my understanding, the travel time of the investigators using technology. Explain how that is, especially in a rural area where the investigators have to go out and travel long distances.
Well, I certainly think that the time saved, resources saved for both the regulated community and the department have been great with the use of the tablets, particularly, as you said, in the rural areas. We have 9 field offices across the state. But before we began the use of the tablets, our tank inspectors used to go out and they would they would have a clipboard and they would make notes on their clipboard, and they would come back to the field office and they would enter the information into the computer, and it would go into the main system, and then a letter would be sent to the owner or operator telling them the results of the inspection and what needed to be fixed, and then we'd go from there on seeing how those repairs were done. It was just a time-consuming process. Now, when our inspectors go out, they have a portable printer in their trucks. They have their tablets that have the forms loaded onto them for the inspections. They walk around with the owner-operator who's right there beside them, and they do the inspection with them present. They tell them, what they see. They'll point out to them where the problems are exactly. Then once they go over the report with them after the inspection's over, the owner-operator signs the report, which seals the report. It cannot be changed after that. And they print it out there and give them a hard copy, or they'll email it to them, whichever they prefer. And that has made compliance much more rapid with those types of issues, because the owner-operator, for one thing, is aware of what the report is going to say immediately. And it increases our credibility with the regulated community because they know we can't change that report when we get back. Now, indeed, if the main office looks at the report and finds out there's some problem, there might be some mistake, something that was done wrong, we have to do an addendum. We can't change that report. So it begins with the regulated community knowing immediately what's going on and what they need to improve, so they can get started on that immediately. And oftentimes it's taken care of within a few days.
Thank you. My time is well expired. I chair now recognizes Ms. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I'm going to yield to the gentleman from California who has a conflict.
No,
Another hearing.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tonko, for allowing me to ask my questions. Dr. Wasson, your testimony covers a number of important environmental problems, including disturbing health trends in communities around mountaintop removal sites. But I'd like to ask about your work to address coal ash contamination, an issue that has been a major focus of this subcommittee. What are some of the problems you have seen from unsafe coal ash disposal?
Thank you, Congressman Waxman, for that question. The Appalachian Voices, my organization, does work a lot of our time is spent trying to address the problem of unsafe coal ash practices in North Carolina and other states around the Northeast or the Southeast. And certainly the most dramatic problem we have seen recently was the Dan River coal ash spill, when 40,000 gallons of toxic coal ash spilled into the Dan River in an entirely avoidable accident. It's in North Carolina, we have 14 sites where coal ash is stored. In every site, these are being stored in unlined impoundments that have been shown to be leaching toxic and heavy metals into groundwater, as well as seeping contaminants into nearby surface waters. These are all built directly adjacent to large waterways, many of which provide drinking water for millions of North Carolinians.
Well, we've heard from repeatedly people on this committee tell us that the states are doing a good job of regulating coal ash, but your testimony tells a different story.
That's right. I don't think that many people in North Carolina, certainly many elected officials of both parties and the media have complained very loudly about the poor state of regulation of coal ash in the state. That the fact that these impoundments were leaking and leaching into nearby surface waters was not discovered by the state, by any of the state regulators, until environmental groups went out and actually did the monitoring and discovered some of these problems and filed suit. And then eventually the state stepped in, but as you probably know, the state is actually under a criminal investigation around how the state agencies have handled.
Which state is that?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. So if we're relying on the states to do this, and without federal backup of any sort, there's a lack of transparency, a lack of enforcement, a lack of necessary safeguards. It seems like a lack of even trying to understand what's happening for the coal ash. How are your organizations and others using technology to fill in some of the gaps in federal and state efforts to ensure safe disposal?
So we work with a coalition of groups led by the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, based out of Knoxville, that has provided online tools so that people can understand where these coal ash impoundments are if they're living next to them, and actually obtain information about what the groundwater testing that's happening there, so that they have a sense of what's going into their groundwater. Again, in a state like North Carolina, 50% of the residents rely on wells for their drinking water. So this is a very big concern.
Well, if you're monitoring data and other information, and it becomes accessible on the internet or through cell phones, how do we make sure that those who don't have access to that technology get the information they need?
And that is the excellent question, and it's why I think technology is very limited in its ability to help with some of these problems. Certainly in coal mining regions in Appalachia, access to high-speed internet like DSL or cable or even cell phone reception, it seems like a distant dream in many of these communities. It requires very resource-intensive, boots-on-the-ground kind of efforts in order to engage folks who are living with the greatest threat.
I've argued for the last several years that strong federal coal ash regulations are needed to protect public health and the environment from toxic elements, including arsenic, lead, mercury, and selenium. Will state action be enough, or do you think we need a strong federal regulation for coal ash? And EPA is finalizing their coal ash rule. Can citizen participation play an important role in highlighting the need for strong, enforceable federal standards?
I think the situation in North Carolina is one of the best arguments I could provide for why we absolutely do need a strong federal role in coal ash regulation. It is going to be a disaster, I think, if we leave most of that up to the states.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks very much to our panel for being with us today. Really appreciate your testimony. Just a little background. I know that members of this subcommittee have already heard me say this, but I represent a district with 60,000 manufacturing jobs, and right along the same line, I also represent the largest agricultural district in the state of Ohio. So dealing with regulations and complying with them are one of the things that I hear from my constituents the most. And it was a couple of years ago that the SBA had come out and said that we have $1.7 trillion of regulations here in this country, and unfortunately it was updated this year to $1.9 trillion. So interestingly enough, when I spend out my district going through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different plants and businesses across my district, the number one issue I always hear about is regulations. And if I could start with Mr. Kovacs, I found it interesting, your testimony, because I think that it's also always interesting to remember these things. You have on page 5 of your testimony, you state that the Hoover Dam was built in 5 years, the Empire State Building took 1 year and 45 days, the Pentagon less than 18 months, the New Jersey Turnpike 4 years from inception to completion. Then you fast forward to 2014, the Cape Wind needed over a decade to receive the necessary permits to build an offshore wind farm. And it's interesting you point these things out, because as you look at where we've gone from start to finish and how fast these regulations have kicked in, and that's what I hear from the businesses. But I've never heard any of my businesses out there ever say this, that they're not for clean air or clean water. They want to make sure that's happening. But it's really the overburdensome regulations that they have to comply with. But if I could, you also show on page 5 of your testimony on the time required for processing a permit to drill on federal versus state lands. And you point out that the Institute for Energy Research testified that it currently takes more than 300 days to process a permit to drill for oil and gas on federal lands onshore, while it takes less than 1 month to process a permit for the same drilling activities on state and private lands. And also you point out on your graph on page 5 that Ohio in particular is one of the fastest permit processing states. Would you agree that Ohio's efficiency does not make them less environmentally protective?
I would agree with that, certainly.
And now, why would you agree with that?
Well, when you understand the permitting system, to just even start a permit, you have to do a whole series of things. You have to do engineering drawings, you have to do testing of the air, the water, you have to do site plans. All of that must be done in order even to file for a permit. And so when they review it, the agency reviews the technical data. And the technical data is going to be almost virtually the same in Ohio or with the federal. The difference between the two programs is that in the federal program, if there's any federal nexus at all, the program moves into an area where there's no coordination. And by that I mean there's really no one running the show. There are no time limits on when the permit has to be reviewed, and anyone can jump into the permitting process at any time, and you can go into a conflict between state environmental impact statements and federal, even if they have the same laws. So when you go under state law, you're getting a much faster process because you just don't have as many ways in which to stop the problem, and it's managed closer to a business, which I believe someone had talked about. And the approach that we have been arguing and the House has moved forward on and the Senate is put someone in charge of the program. We're not telling them what to do. Give them a role as a lead agency and to coordinate. Give everyone time limits in which to participate. If they don't want to participate in the time limits, then they don't have to, but then they're out of the program, and make a decision. And that's really what the key. We're not talking substance here. We're talking process.
So that's how, when in your testimony, you also state about improving and streamlining the process. Is that how you go about it, or other ways you'd see it?
No, that's how we would go about it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interested in today's testimony about ways to improve our environmental monitoring. through better technology at the state level and through greater public participation. Obviously, the sooner pollution is detected, the faster it can be contained and remediated. For example, an inspection of the tank that leaked in West Virginia could have prevented widespread harm, but inspections require resources both from the regulatory agency and the regulated entity. With that being said, Mr. Schlesinger, you testified that EPA is planning to reduce the number and frequency of inspections it conducts. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, in their strategic plan, there's a substantial reduction in the amount of enforcement actions, civil actions, inspections going forward, mainly because of the reduction in the budget.
Do you have concerns about the impact that that shift would have on compliance?
We're very concerned. As Ms. Marks mentioned, the key to compliance in her state was walking around. It's with a new high-tech gadget that makes it much more efficient, but the key is getting someone to do the walking around. And as you mentioned in the spill in West Virginia, it had been, I think it was decades before someone from the state had been on that site. So if you're going, yes, if you use these high-tech technology, you can probably do more with less. But when the less is so much less that you are doing significantly less, feet on the ground, going to sites, helping people get in compliance, you're going to have more problems.
Well, I had served in our state legislature in New York for 25 years, and I know that we have a sound track record with the environment, but I would have to agree that all states do not play the same degree of intense role in enforcing many environmental regulations. Dr. Watson, can you briefly describe some of the problems you have seen in state enforcement of environmental regulations? I know you mentioned some, but can you share some other scenarios with us, please?
Sure. Well, I think what it boils down to is time and again, it takes us filing a lawsuit or entering in some sort of proceeding to get the states to act. They're not doing it on their own. That's true in North Carolina. That's true in Kentucky. In the examples I gave in my written testimony, it's true in other states that we worked in. And so I think you have a lot of hardworking and very well-intentioned state regulators that are strapped for the resources to do their jobs effectively. And that's really what it boils down to. In the state of North Carolina, we just cut the funding by as much as 25, and then on top more than 25% for our state agency. They just can't do the job that we mandate them to do with the resources that are available to them. And I really think that that's the underlying problem.
Right. I know that a number of states and organizations have indicated that doing more with less has now become doing less.
That's exactly right.
What role can informed citizens play, in your view, in informing environmental regulation?
Well, it's informed citizens in the cases that I gave of fraudulent water quality monitoring in Kentucky, or the leaking coal ash impoundments in North Carolina. It's engaged citizens that's entirely responsible for why we have any enforcement actions at all. And so it's our job as environmental advocates is to get more citizens engaged. I liked very much what Ms. Marks had to say, that citizens being the eyes and ears of the state agencies. We also very much see it that way. And I think that there's a role to play for citizens when the state agencies just are not able to fulfill their mandate.
And what are some of the steps that your organization has taken to empower citizens to monitor and enforce environmental laws?
Our Appalachian, or the Appalachian Citizens Enforcement Project that I spoke about in my written testimony is one example where we're actually going out and we're training people to monitor the water quality in streams near their homes. We're providing them with the equipment to do that, as well as some expert consulting to help answer questions and help them do something with that information. It's one thing to find that the water across this, the road from your house is polluted. It's another to actually take action on that and get that problem corrected. And so, you know, it takes a lot of hand-holding, honestly, for regular citizens to be able to engage at that level, but it's possible, and we're proving it's possible. We're working with groups all across Appalachia that are every day proving that it's possible to get people engaged in this.
Right, I note my 5 minutes have expired, so I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. And Chair, now recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of some of the testimony that has been given, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that this article by Dr. Borak be included in the file.
Let me, I'm sure we'll accept it, but let me make sure the minority has taken a look at it. And you can go ahead and we'll make that request.
I think what Dr. Borak says in light of some of the comments that have been made here is that I think we've heard once again there seems to be an attack on the coal industry in West Virginia. I thought we were having a panel on modernization and how we work, but this has turned into a little bit on part of some of the folks one more attack on our coal miners in the industry. And what Borak goes on to his report says, coal mining is not per se an independent risk factor for increased mortality in Appalachia. Appalachians suffer disproportionately poor health and significantly higher mortality rates than the rest of the nation. The Appalachian counties with the poorest health are also the most economically depressed, the least educated, and those with limited access to social and medical services. So to try to connect that to mountaintop mining is a stretch. There may be a connection. I'm not going to dispute that. But I think we have to take other things into consideration. Smokeless tobacco, I didn't see, or tobacco use. I didn't see that as a chart to see whether or not that. I didn't see a chart about diabetes. Could that be affecting health and cancer issues with that? So I think we have to be fair when we're doing these kinds of reports, that we have try to be more unbiased than what I've heard in this testimony so far. Also, in Mr. Wasson or Dr. Wasson, your report, you talked about the sports fishing industry creates more jobs in the surface coal mining, and maybe it does, But I'd say the coal mining jobs that are being paid $50,000 and $70,000 a year are far better than the sports fishermen that may be in a $25,000 job. If we're trying to get these people out of poverty, we need to have good paying jobs, and once more an attack on the coal industry, because we've got counties in West Virginia and in eastern Kentucky that just simply don't have other alternatives. That's what they say. They're economically depressed, and to take away something that's a good paying job is really a threat to their livelihood. So I think we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions. I wish one of the proponents were here today to continue on with this discussion instead of skipping out. But you also raised a good point, Dr. Yarmouth, or Dr. Wasson, about Yarmouth. The Yarmouth bill is interesting, and I hope it does get a hearing. I think we need to have those kinds. We can't be afraid in Congress to talk about tough subjects. But at the same time, it was announced earlier today that we have 321 bills sitting over in the Senate. The other not being acted on. So I would say that perhaps maybe that's a good trade. If we're going to take up Yarmouth's bill, then maybe the other body ought to take up some of the bills that we have sitting over there that have to do with jobs, health care, coal mining, and the like. But let me close again with your issue about the fly ash, because I think your group and some of the groups that you represent were opposed to the fly ash bill that's passed out of the House 4 times. It's one of those bills that's sitting over, the 321 that's sitting over there in the Senate without action. It would have addressed all the problems that you've talked about, all the leakage. The fly ash bill, the legislation, the coal ash bill, took care of impoundments. It took care of dam safety. It took care of water leakage. All those issues were taken, but yet groups that you are engaged with oppose the legislation. I think it's hypocritical that you're coming here and telling us that we need to do it when we've done that. We passed that, but the Senate, the other body, won't take those bills up. So I hope that you can be more fair in your assessment in the future, all of you, as we address these issues in modernization. Let's stay to the subject matter. So are you telling me that Brandy Huffman, the DEP, is incapable of handling issues in West Virginia on DEP?
I do not in any way mean to impugn Mr. Huffman and
but
his
you've
ability
used
to do his job.
the Freedom Industries tank. You've talked about the surface mining. All those issues come under his purview, and you're denigrating him. You're running him down, and I'm saying, is that fair?
I'm saying the facts on the ground show that the goal, the environmental outcomes that we would expect are not being achieved. That the health of people in those counties.
Should he lose his job?
That is, I do not have a position on whether or not Mr. Huffman should have his job. I am simply observing that if we look at just the science, just the environmental outcomes that we see on the ground in West Virginia, they are not being achieved. What we should expect when people in southern West Virginia counties have the same life expectancy of somebody in Iran or Syria or Vietnam, there's something wrong.
I've run over my time, but I'd sure like to see it because I think that, Vietnam is at age 36, 37 in Vietnam. I think the life expectancy is much greater than 36 and 37 in southern West Virginia. And I'm sorry that I've run over my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. I did consult with the minority, and without objection, I'd ask for the article authored by Jonathan Borak to be accepted into the record without objection. So ordered. The chair now recognizes gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
I'd like to thank you, Chairman, and our Ranking Member Tonko for holding today's hearing and welcome our distinguished panelists for joining us. I want to turn to a law that this subcommittee passed in 2012 with strong bipartisan support. The Hazardous Waste Electronic Manifest Establishment Act finally gave the EPA the authority and the resources it needed to develop an e-manifest system for hazardous waste shipping. This law is a prime example of how technology can improve environmental protection outcomes while providing measurable burden reductions for the states and the regulated community. Although still in the works, the states and industry are expected to save $75 million per year under this new electronic system for waste shipment manifest. Ms. Sparks, do you expect your department and the regulated entities in your states to benefit from the new e-manifest system?
Yes, sir. I think certainly that is something that will benefit the states in our attempts to regulate. There are always instances where you need to know if there are things that are on the roads in your state that you need to be mindful of. It certainly helps to have that transparency for the public too. It's just reassuring to the public to know that there's nothing that anybody's trying to cover up in that regard.
Mr. Cash, what about Massachusetts?
Yeah, we approach this in the same kind of way as Ms. Marks. We're all on board with this. We think it creates the kind of transparency and tracking of these kinds of materials that's critically important.
Mr. Darwin, I know Arizona is kind of like Texas. We have a lot of cross-border. Do you expect benefits and reduced burdens in Arizona?
Yes, sir, I do. I think anytime you can transfer resources from shuffling paper to analyzing data, it benefits everyone.
Okay. Do you think that the experience with eManifest can serve as an example for other e-enterprise projects?
Congressman Green, I think that the only thing that I would suggest be different between what EPA has done with the e-manifesting system and what they're doing with the e-enterprise system is involving states in the design of the system. I think EPA is recognized, and I applaud them for recognizing the role that states play in implementing environmental regulations throughout this country, and I'm hopeful that in implementing their e-enterprise system, the proof is that they've been doing that so far, is that they'll involve the states more heavily in the development of future systems.
Obviously, I agree because I joke in Texas it must be in our DNA that we disagree with the EPA, but generationally. But again, the partnership makes it much more easier. Mr. Schlesinger, you worked closely on eManifest for many years and continue to follow its implementations. What lessons should we in Congress and regulators at the state level learn from eManifest for other e-enterprise initiatives?
I think there's quite a few lessons that can be learned, but I think the most important one, and I think the enterprise has taken that on, and that is to work very closely with the states. When you try to uniform a system like manifest reporting, you already may have a lot of different programs already underway in the different states. So getting the states to work with the federal government together and everyone agreeing to compromise, because it's really hard for Connecticut to say, well, we need a uniform system that looks exactly like Connecticut. In Tennessee and Arkansas have a somewhat similar view about how there has to be uniform. So keeping the states involved early and consistently and everyone compromising a little is really key.
For each of your states, would it be better for, would you be better served if the U.S. EPA had greater resources to work with that, with each state to make sure it is coordinated?
The basic answer is yes. The more resources and assistance that we get from EPA at this point, the better. As was seen in my testimony, we've had cuts in the order of 30% over the last 8 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. And it becomes increasingly difficult to do the kinds of compliance, permitting, and enforcement that we need to, and assistance from EPA, particularly on these issues in which there's cross-state transfer of, in this case, hazardous waste. Yeah. It's something that we like to partner with EPA on.
Mr. Chairman, I'm almost out of time. It seems that we have a lot of opportunities to build on the success of our e-manifest and improve process of regulated entities and get better outcomes. And I'd like to thank you and the ranking member for holding hearings. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. I've got a question for the gentleman. Do you remember who were the sponsors of the e-manifest legislation? Do you remember who moved that through the House? I think it was a Mr. Green and a Mr. Shimkus was the original authors, but my memory doesn't serve me well. It didn't end out that way. It ended up a John Thune bill in the Senate after they mashed it up. But I thought you were very, very humble in those questions. Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to have you all with us today. I first want to bring to the attention of Mr. Schlesinger and Dr. Wasson. When I was in college in West Virginia, and I spent a lot of time in Appalachian areas that were affected by a lot of poverty and a lot of coal problems out there, and I've spent my time also dealing everything from the Buffalo Creek gob pile disaster, maybe before you were born, sir, but it was brutal, the things that happened down there. But one of my concerns sometimes with environmental groups is the misleading data. You showed us a couple maps of lifespan and cancer, and I think you were trying to relate that to mountaintop mining. Let me show you a map here first of, I believe this is poverty rates in Appalachia. It's the same. Now let me show you the next map, unemployment. The problem is people don't have jobs, and when you have issues of people unemployed and don't have jobs, you have a number of health effects, increased asthma, increased cancer, depression, mental health problems. Shorter life expectancy associated with that. It's when people aren't working. And much of that not working is we have a lot of closed mines, abandoned mines, closed coal-fired power plants. I really hope that the environmental groups can work with us on finding solutions and unleashing the vast brilliance of American technology to find solutions for this, different from shutting it down. And I welcome any opportunity to discuss that with you folks there. Because the poverty in those parts of the country, particularly eastern Kentucky, where you have and parts of West Virginia, we have a 40% unemployment rate, 40%, and 8 times the national rate of substance abuse. It's brutal. And parts of my district, however, are saved, even though in Greene County, something like 30% of their income is dependent upon coal. Thank goodness they have Marcellus Shale, because that's something they can have for some income there. To which case I then turn my attention to Ms. Marks, talk about Arkansas a little bit. With my family's from, you may have heard of Murphy Oil.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
not from that side of the family. We went into
I'm sorry.
We went into healthcare, but from the El Dorado Murphys and the Springdale Murphys out there, and part of that Fayetteville Shale is out there. But we went to healthcare. But I want to ask about the role of the Department of Environmental Quality. How does that? What is their role in the regulation of natural gas exploration in Arkansas?
We actually share that role with the Oil and Gas Commission. We like to say that we deal with the surface facilities and they deal with the drilling facilities. We have a memorandum of understanding with them that they deal with the actual drilling process itself, the construction of the wells, those kind of things. They permit those. We deal with the ponds on site, the water issues, all of those types of things.
And how many state regulators do you have that monitor all these in the state?
We have the water. I can't speak for the Oil and Gas Commission. They have a number of inspectors that go out on site. We have in our water division, which is where we are involved most closely with the oil and gas, we have 17 inspectors. And we also have 4 inspectors that are dedicated solely to natural gas issues. We were able to partner with the Oil and Gas Commission and get money from them through a memorandum of agreement that allows us to do joint inspections with them.
And how many regulators does the EPA have on in Arkansas to deal with the same thing?
They don't have any regulators actually located in Arkansas. Dallas is the closest place.
Now, you've moved towards doing electronic reporting in Arkansas, so how has this affected the speed of time in moving forward and the thoroughness of reviewing permitting?
It's been a great help, and it will be much more of a help when we actually get it fully implemented. But the fact that we don't have to deal with paper copies and uploading information into a database that then goes to EPA has saved a tremendous amount of time for both us and the regulated community.
Do you also maintain records of chemicals used for fracking in natural gas?
The Oil and Gas Commission does. That's on their website, and it's open to the public.
And it's required, they have to file full disclosure in Arkansas?
They have to file disclosure. I'm not sure of the actual specifics of that law, but they do have to disclose the materials and fracking fluids in Arkansas.
Also, with regard to ponds there, do you maintain public records with regard to content in those ponds and any leaks in them or any environmental hazards associated with them so public can also review those?
Yes, sir. We have certain requirements. Our ponds are permitted on the basis of a permit by rule, and those ponds have to have they have to have below a certain level to be able to be put in those outside ponds, and they have to be lined a certain way, constructed a certain way.
EPA has told us that there are not necessarily problems with those. Have you found problems with regard to any leaks or problems with groundwater contamination of any kind with those?
Not so much with groundwater contamination, surface water contamination we have. You have sometimes ponds are going to fail, and sometimes you have people that don't follow the right construction process, and we will have contamination with adjacent waterways, but nothing that's been, I'd say, completely horrible. I mean, we've had leaks that we have had to address. We've had some minor fish kills, but that's that's rare, but it has happened.
Okay. Gentleman's time has expired. Just to let people know, committee rules are that committee and subcommittee get to answer the questions first, and then guests like Mr. Yarmouth will get a chance at the end once all the committee members have asked their questions. And so with that, I'll turn to Congressman Johnson from Ohio. He's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Director Darwin, in your review of processes that required improvement, what activities constituted the places most in need of reform or elimination in your view?
Thank you, Congressman Johnson. It's a great question. And the fact of the matter is that what we found is that there is no process that couldn't use some sort of improvement. Studies have shown that whenever you review a process, about 80% of the process is wasteful. From a document sitting on someone's desk, from a document transferring from one desk to another, from errors that have occurred within the document. So as an agency, we've been reviewing every single one of our processes for whether or not it warrants improvement or not. We've done everything from the long lead time permits that we issue. Those permits that takes the longest. I think the chairman mentioned that we have seen a 60% reduction in that time frame. We have reduced the time it takes for a public records request by 80%, for us to respond to public records requests by 80% over the past 2 years as well. The time we see from us identifying a violation, from it being corrected, that period of time is reduced by over 50% over the same period of time. So as an agency, we've been reviewing every single one of our processes, acknowledging that every process can be improved, and prioritizing them based upon their impact to the environment.
Okay. Well, you indicated in your written testimony that there is and I quote, a lot of wasted effort embedded in the current process and that it invites error and delay in evaluating adherence to environmental requirements. Can you give us some examples, specific examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Most environmental protection programs rely heavily on self-monitoring and reporting. We heard a lot about that today. This means that the entity must collect data and report the data to the responsible government entity, and they largely do this via paper. This is despite the fact the rest of the business world is reporting the things that they do. Even we do electronically. Think of our online bank accounts that we have. and how we've demanded as a public that we have access to the information that our banks have electronically. What this is, if we choose to follow a pure paper operation, it results in slow transactions and they're wrought with human error. Electronic reporting, on the other hand, is much quicker. It contains less error and allows for almost immediate feedback about whether or not there is a need for corrective action. When we receive electronic information from those who we regulate, we can give them immediate feedback of whether or not they're complying with environmental requirements, and they can take corrective action to resolve those issues.
Do you see similar issues at the federal level?
Absolutely, and I think it's imperative that we understand that the federal government has acknowledged that as well. Through the e-manifesting system they've developed, through the EDMR system under the Clean Water Act that they're also looking into, and then this e-enterprise program that they have been partnering with the states is really their acknowledgement that they're dealing with the same issues the states are on needing to transfer their operations into the 21st century.
Okay. Please explain for us how confidential business information will still be protected when information technology sharing like, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, MyDEQ, is that how you say that?
Absolutely, yes.
Are developed and used.
Yes, sir. This is a concern that we've heard from our business community in Arizona. And what I respond to them, and I'll respond to you the same way, is that there are certain laws within Arizona that protect confidential business information, and those laws remain unchanged regardless of how we receive the information. The fact of the matter is, though, that the information that we are receiving, even if it's not confidential business information, still may be subject to public records laws. And so as we are receiving this electronic information, our disseminating that information and make that information publicly available is something that we have to work with our regulated community to make sure that we are fulfilling their expectations and also our obligations under our public records laws.
Okay. Final question for you. How does the fee-for-service model and having a significant portion of Arizona's DEQ's budget from fees and other revenue from the regulated community improve compliance and environmental protection in Arizona?
Congressman Johnson, I'm sure you're referring to the fact that my agency was taken off the general fund 3 years ago. That means that our budget is made up of 85% fees from our regulated community and 15% from the federal government through grants from EPA. What this has caused us to do is to become much more responsive to our regulated community. It only makes sense. They're paying for 85% of our budget. They deserve some additional attention from us. And the fact of the matter is, when I was going before our legislature and asking for the ability to increase fees to fund my agency, I had to make commitments to the regulated community to get their support. And the commitment that I made to them was that I would issue permits to them quicker so they could do the business that they were asking to perform in Arizona and a quicker as well. So that I fulfilled that commitment by becoming more responsive to them because of the fact that they are now 85% of my budget.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I have one question for Mr. Kovacs. Arizona removed the budget for the Department of Environmental Quality, and I know you referred to it just now, another witness did, from the general fund in favor of a fee-for-service model. Does this chamber support such a move like that for the states?
Well, it's certainly an interesting concept, and I'd like to see more data about it, but I think, I'm sorry. No, I think it's not. And I'd like to see more data, but it's
just pull a little bit closer, and I think that'll make everybody.
It's a fascinating concept. The states overall receive roughly about 60% of their budget, I think, 45 to 60% from fees anyway. And on the fee issue, in some states, I believe even like California, for an example, for an environmental impact statement, the developer actually pays. I don't think anyone is asking, because they pay, that doesn't mean they get any special treatment. What it means is that they've paid for a service. If you buy a book on Amazon, you expect a book. If you pay for a filing fee for a hazardous waste facility or solid waste facility, you expect that the state will review it. You still have to comply with all the same tests. You still have to comply with the engineering drawings, the zoning requirements. Anyone who wants to sue can still sue. All of that is still in place, and if the state makes a mistake or there's a violation, the state has enforcement authorities where they deny the permit. But what the the business community never asked for is special treatment. They asked for the service that they would be paying for. And I think that on states like Arizona, I think that you've got a good laboratory.
Very good. Anyone else wish to comment on the fee-for-service model?
I would, Congressman. We believe it's not the best way for the government to operate, is that the regulated control the budget of the regulator. The example that was just mentioned, that the state had to agree to be faster with approving permits as a prerequisite to get the needed fees to run, I think is a bad precedent. Shouldn't the priority be possibly something else that is more protective of the general public and protecting the environment and public health, as opposed to speeding up the processes for a permit? As I said in my testimony, the priority of environmental agencies should be enforcing the environmental laws. Making the paperwork system work better is a very nice secondary. But when that secondary group is essentially controlling and having the impact to say what the budget and priorities are going to be, is a very bad way to go.
Would the gentleman, Mr. Belgar?
Yes, I will.
Yeah, I would just point out that NRDC previously in the pesticide regulation obviously endorsed, the stakeholders paying into the system for identifying and then application and approval process. I would also say that we do that a lot in the drugs and devices world that we deal with all the time. The user fee system has been very successful in trying to force the bureaucracy to move rapidly to in a timely manner to get a decision. It could be a yes, it could be a no, but at least when you have a period of time where you don't know when a final decision will be made, that is problematic. And I want to ask my colleague from Florida if I can finish up and ask another question. And I need to go to Mr. Cash just for this issue. Can you provide more details on why the E-Enterprise for Environment initiative between the states and the EPA is important for Massachusetts?
As I had mentioned before, implied before, there are many different programs that we have that overlap with EPA, that we do in collaboration with EPA. And we don't want to be in a situation as we move to an electronic system, as we are in Massachusetts, as many other states are, in which we replicate the kind of different layers of regulation that we have on a paper system. We don't want to do a similar kind of system electronically. We don't want to be in a situation where our permittees are applying online in Massachusetts and then have to do a similar thing on a different system for EPA. And so really important that we coordinate these things across the different levels, and that's one of the reasons we've been so engaged in this.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, can I ask Mr. Schlesinger to respond to that? I believe he...
I would. It's the gentleman from Florida's time. If Mr. Billakis, you want to yield the remaining of your time to...
Yes, I will.
Then yes.
1 second.
Thank you, Mr. Billakis. I think the difference with pesticides in the funding of that program and approval was that was an additional delta. It did not come as it did in the other case that was mentioned out of the base budget. You're not going to get your base budget unless you took care of this priority first, whereas a pesticide add-on, which is a fee, is a delta on top of the normal EPA budget.
And I would just say that's a credible debate, but it's also a credible point to be made that user fees have been successful throughout the government operations for streamlining and getting accountability. I'd like to now recognize a very patient gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Yarmouth, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the courtesy of the subcommittee. Thanks to all the witnesses. Thank you for your service. Dr. Watson, I was pleased that in your testimony you said it's important that we eliminate duplication and streamline our regulatory processes. That makes total sense, but that the foundation of any effective and efficient regulatory process is scientific evidence and knowledge of how certain practices impact the health and well-being of our citizens. We hear a lot about the economic burden of regulation on coal operators, but we also know that there is a personal cost paid by those families who live near coal mining sites. As you mentioned, a number of peer-reviewed studies have shown that there are higher rates of cancer and mortality. Those living near a mountaintop removal site, I think there are more than 20 of those studies. So would you kind of elaborate in light of Mr. McKinley and Mr. Murphy's statements about other factors, what you're talking about when you're talking about higher rates of cancer and mortality and the evidence of them?
Sure, I'm very familiar with the study that Mr. McKinley entered into the record, and there is one study. They use different statistical methods to come to their conclusions. I think what's so impressive about the literature that shows health issues near mountaintop removal mines is just the sheer number of different independent sources of data that point that direction. So, you know, maybe there's some debate over some statistical methods over some of those studies, but taken as a whole, if you look at the entire body of evidence, it's really pretty stunning. And again, it's independent. There's almost 40 different researchers that have published on these among these 21 different studies. And so I think that's really the biggest factor. And again, the tools that I talked about in my written testimony, where we provide information about these maps that I showed. We also have the poverty information. That could have been our maps as well. And the scientists control for those factors. And so when they do a study, they're looking at smoking rates and poverty rates and education rates and factoring those into their analysis. And so, yes, many of the things that the other members have said are true, but that does not in any way discredit the studies that we're talking about.
You know, you've spent a lot of time in Appalachia, and I've spent some time, and I'm sure you've seen this before. That is water that came from the drinking well of the Urias family in eastern Kentucky. That's URIAS for the recorder. Those of you who think that's not dramatic, there's a contrast with normal water. And, I think they don't need a website in their neighborhood, in their community, to know that there's a health problem associated with that water. If that were the drinking water here in Congress, none of us we would not only wouldn't drink it, we would not stand for it. And yet people in Appalachia, for those people, the federal government has yet to conduct a single study examining the health impact of coal mining on the communities that it inhabits. And that's exactly the point that I think all of us agree on, Mr. McKinley, Mr. Murphy, that we need the kind of information, scientific information, to determine what the impact on the health of these citizens is. And the AIC Act, which you mentioned, and Mr. McKinley may want to co-sponsor, I'm certainly going to ask him, basically does that. It says we have to, the federal government has to conduct a study on the health impact of mountaintop removal before it issues any more permits. So can you tell me what the impact of such a law would be if it passed on the health of the citizens of Appalachia?
Well, the study itself, it's a great start, and it's long overdue. There's just no question about it. There's too much information showing health problems to continue to ignore. The other obvious impact is a moratorium on issuing new mountaintop removal permits is an excellent idea, and I don't think that we need any more studies. The health studies aside, just the water quality impacts, the rich scientific literature about the water quality impacts of mountaintop removal would justify such a moratorium right now, today. And so, no, I think that study and as well as the moratorium would be an excellent start.
Great. I thank you very much. Once again, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your courtesy.
Gentleman yields back his time, and seeing no other members present wishing to ask questions, we really want to thank you. I think it's very, obviously a little broader in some of the issues, but I think as a chairman of the subcommittee and trying to deal and reconcile and really talking to a lot of the Environmental Council of the states, which you all are kind of membership, and understanding the good work that they're doing, understanding the federal role in setting standards, as the rank member of the full committee keeps reminding me, how can we continue to work together? And the last point I'll just make is that we have a budgetary crisis, and we're always going to have that, and our problem is mandatory spending. which keeps eating away at the discretionary budget, and the discretionary budget eats away at the EPA's budget. So until we do Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest payments on our debt, and I would encourage people, if they want the federal government to do more, they need to help engage and start talking about reforming the entitlement program. So with that, I'd like to adjourn. Thank you again, and adjourn the hearing.